Welcome to Breaking the Mold, a podcast from Action Funder. Here at Action Funder, we work with businesses and we work with non-profit leaders. We enable the two to work together to create measurable change. In this podcast, we're going to introduce you to some of the change makers we work with, we know and we admire. They'll be coming to us from boardrooms and community centres across the country. Together, we'll tackle questions about sustainability, about working in partnership, and about achieving real impact. Get ready to hear about what challenges and drives these people who are dedicated to taking action on the issues that really matter.
Hi, this is Mark Shearer, co-founder and CEO of Action Funder. I'll be your host for today's episode. This month, I'm talking with Piers Linney. Piers is an entrepreneur and TV personality, as well as a philanthropist and a believer in business as a force for good. Together, we dive into Piers' journey to success and the challenges he faced as a mixed-race man. We talk about ways businesses can become more inclusive and a force for good. And we touch on artificial intelligence and the possibilities it can open up for businesses and the third sector. Piers, welcome to Breaking the Mold. Thank you very much for being part of this podcast series. We're delighted to have you on board. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you get up to so that the audience can have a background?
What do I get up to?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so I've got people know me from being on TV. Yeah, so I'm best known for being a former dragon on Dragon's Den, and I was a secret millionaire on Channel 4. But my background actually, so I'm from mixed race. My mom's from Barbados. My dad was from Manchester. I grew up in a Lancashire mill town. Born in Stoke-on-Trent, moved to Lancashire. I was about 9, and I kind of grew up in this mill town. And I was fascinated by social and economic history because I could basically see the mills and the weavers' cottages, and I found it fascinating. And that's what got me interested in sort of business and entrepreneurs really of the age. And then where I ended up being a lawyer in the city and then an investment banker at Credit Suisse, which was then Credit Suisse First Boston. That was when Credit Suisse was solvent. And I then came out of there, and I was always had businesses on the side in different things. And some grew, some became quite big. Some you win, some you lose. And I spent most of my career in technology, some media, and telecommunications, and the convergence of the two, and then cloud. And then now I'm very focused on artificial intelligence, which I think is going to be bigger than Web 1 to 4 or 1 to 3, to be honest with you. So that's what I'm very focused on now. But having said all of that, I've always been very interested in business as a force for good. So I wrote a thesis on the social contract at university about the various stakeholders of organizations moving away from the owner to the shareholders, now to the global environment, and then everyone that sort of touches. So that's always fascinated me. And I've always been sort of interested in making sure that whatever I do is a force for good, or as my former chairman said to Ken Alyssa, that if you do well, that you do good.
Piers, what drives you? I get asked this a bit with Action Funder. What do you think is that driver? Because a lot of that's about making the world a better place, and you being a really strong advocate and very driven person making that happen. Where does that come from?
Well, I'm not going to pretend that when I started out, I wasn't really that concerned with the global environment. I was more worried about getting a new car. That's just where it's kind of where you start. And I was a bit like my thesis. I kind of started in the middle, and the interested parties moved out. Then you have a family, and then your dad passed away, and you realize you're mortal. So it's changed over time, and what's driven me really is that even today, I've made money, lost money, I've built businesses, and I found business or any organization, where it can be a charity, I find the whole process fascinating, and working with a team and building something and going to market with it. And essentially, a successful business or successful charity, whatever it might be, what you're trying to do is add value to someone's life. You're trying to add sufficient value that they're willing to pay you enough for it, that based on what it's cost you to provide that service or good, that you can make a bit of money. And then what you do with that money is kind of up to you. Along the way, I've kind of chosen to, invest that money, but also, we involved in philanthropy. I'm not some giving pledge, I'm not that wealthy, but I spent time with Sir Richard Branson in Ulu Saba, and I've worked with Virgin Unite quite closely. I was a trustee for 6 years of Nesta, which, if you don't know, is probably the largest UK charity no one's ever heard of. Which
we were funded by Nesta originally, actually.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
So I probably have come across my desk or something. I was there until about 3 years ago.
Okay.
but it's a big organization. It's about 600 million, and the endowment's about 600 million now, originally national lottery money. So I kind of came through sort of nest of it, and then I was on the board of British Business Bank during COVID, which is, it's kind of a government role, really. I wasn't doing it for the money, but I signed up to do a board meeting a month. I was doing 2 a week.
Wow.
So that was sort of a kind of part of my giving back.
Yeah.
And I've also had to do along the way. So on a macro level, things like I've just mentioned, but also at a micro level, I'm a big believer in that you as an individual, as a person, can actually make a difference to someone's life. If you're most people who are trying to get on in life and social mobility and business, or especially if you're from diverse backgrounds, you haven't got the social capital or access to networks or capital or support. And by offering that, if you have it, a bit of time, can fundamentally change people's lives. And I've got stories. We can do a whole podcast just on my stories of people that I've met some random place or on the motorway, a traffic jam, and they wound the window down and shouting. I think, well, what have I done? Have I cut this guy up? And I wound the window down and say, sorry, have I offended you? And he's like, no, I met you 4 years ago. You changed my life. I started a business. And this stuff compounds, doesn't it, over time and makes a difference. So I'm a big believer in that, it's about the little things that actually make a difference. And little things do matter. And people forget that.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, no, what motivation. I think the bit that I caught in there as well was it's adding value to people's lives. And I think using business to do that, or doing it on a personal level, is very profound. And look, I'm useless if I'm helping someone or doing something. I get much more pleasure from creating a positive change. And I think it's that ability to change things for the better. And which brings me on to, first kind of topic, business as a force for good. I mean, people are quite skeptical around that. Do you believe that businesses can genuinely be a force for good? And in this sense, I mean, they can drive a profit and they can make a social impact in the world that we live in. And have you got some good examples of that?
If you go back to my dissertation at university, the corporation, right, was created. There's a social contract, but these things are allowed to exist and own assets and employ people and become legal persons because there was a benefit to society. Yeah. The only issue was that, the only system seems to work is capitalism. And that reflects human nature, which tends to be greed at the core of it. So what regulations had to do over time is kind of temper that by making sure that those various rings, I was thinking about it, as stakeholders are included. Now, in a perfect world, if every public cost was factored into the price of a good or service, then, everything, then the system would work pretty well, actually, but it isn't. It's just private costs. You're not factoring the impact of plastic in the seas, for example, when you're drinking your fresh bottle of spring water. It doesn't work like that. So that's always fascinated me. And that the system could kind of work, but it's probably never going. It's going to be imperfect because it's very, very hard to measure and account for these quite intangible costs and at the end of the day. So the system we've got, which is based on numbers and measuring stuff, it only tends to take us so far. So what's had to happen is regulation, and then the third sector has grown to try and temper that and fix it. But I'm big believer in that. I'm Gen X, right? And we were, we probably were as bad as the baby boomers, but everyone wanted I was a child of the 70s and 80s, everybody wanted a 911 turbo.
Me too.
So, but I think when I look at my children, I've got 2 daughters, a stepson. They're between 12, 14, 15, and they think very differently about the world. They look at labels and they read stuff. Yeah. And my daughter's 12. She's vegetarian, So I think, and again, they're from a particular background and sort of first generation comfortable life, went to a nice school. So not everybody thinks like that. But I think the next generation is much more aware of the impact they're going to have, the impact that we've had generations before them on the world around them. So I think they're much more prepared to stand up and make people accountable for the impact they're having on the world around them than we were. So business eventually has to reflect that. And business generally and law and regulations, it's usually 5 to 50 years behind society. And the danger is that as this more awakened generation enters the labor market and begins to make decisions, is the world just changes so quickly that the regulation can't keep up with it. And then you're back where you were in the 1800s. Yeah.
And interestingly, I always quote the Quakers as business people who looked after their employees were known to be very successful businesses because they had that kind of reciprocal or virtuous circle of looking after employees, giving back, etc., which made them more successful businesses. And which business do you most admire? Oh, it's a big question, but which businesses do you, in this space of being purposeful or responsible and so on?
I know I don't kind of know them, the Virgin Group, the Bransons.
Yeah.
So a lot of things that they've done, and not so much in the businesses, because obviously in their businesses they don't own or control a lot of them. But in what they do, they absolutely is like a stick of rock. Is that business should be a force for good. And I've had the pleasure and the honor of spending time with Sir Richard on safari with him in his private game reserve. Not because he likes me, because I gave him a big donation. So, but I do know, Holly and Virgin Unite. They essentially are supported by the Virgin management, the group, which is the family essentially. So everything they do, like a stick of rock, literally has this ethos running through it, which is why, when I can, I will support and work with them. So I think those brands are quite interesting, but it's a question of how you push that down to the brands you don't control maybe as much. But I mean, as I'm saying that, I'm rapidly going through my Rolodex in my head. I'm kind of struggling with it. I think there's a lot of the sort of brand. I mean, I ride bikes, so I'm a founder of chairman of Atherton Bikes.
I saw, and congratulations, you've had some big success recently.
But there are lots of companies around sort of cycling that are very much been based, like clothing brands. Some have come and gone. They were very much based on that sort of ethos as well.
Yeah.
Some of the big ones were acquired by the large companies. It's quite interesting. These brands that are literally, this is their sort of raison d'etre. They're bought by, the Timberlands and the big companies, and this kind of is built into their brand, but just not at the same level. And they always end up falling out.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting seeing how you end up bridging that gap, because large corporates at the end of the day do have obligations to stakeholders that perhaps don't care quite as much.
Yeah.
But I don't have a company that I think is out and out an amazing representation of that, to be honest with you.
No. Okay.
Well, what are yours? You got Tom's. And I think what's another one?
I love Patagonia. I think Patagonia is
that's what I was thinking of when I was talking about outdoorsy. I couldn't get there. Yeah. I was thinking of Timberland, but Patagonia,
I love your whole thing about the effectively companies should be taxed or for the cost that they have on the planet and for people. So
it's not a tax. It's just that if all the inputs are priced properly, you need to tax them.
True. So whether you increase the price or so on, but I love that, because then what you do is everything you can produce something that is more wasteful, maybe, or has more of a negative impact on the world, but it costs more.
I mean, carbon credits are a great example of trying to do exactly that.
Yeah.
Trying to price the cost of carbon essentially and factor it in.
Yeah.
Then it becomes this tradable kind of nonsense.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to the next subject, diversity and inclusion. How did your parents meet?
So my parents met at a dance in Stoke-on-Trent. My mum was a nurse, came over. Mum was proper Windrush generation, came over in the 1960s, early 63, I think it was.
Yeah.
My dad was a Mancunian lad, very, very intelligent. And they met at a dance, and Mum and Dad just fell in love with this exotic lady he never met before, because he was quite well traveled.
And so there's a huge and very important narrative going on at the moment, and I see a lot of progress in some ways around diversity and inclusion. And I mean, even with the workforce we have at Action Funder, this is absolutely front and center of how we operate and the decisions that we make. But you've been a massive advocate of this.
Yeah, I'm a good example of it. So, when I ended up, imagine me, I'm the sort of Milltown comprehensive lad. There's a couple of friends of mine were from Bangladesh at my school, 2,500 children.
Yeah.
And I was the only person with any kind of Afro-Caribbean heritage. And then, so I went from there to like Credit Suisse First Boston, the city. And along the way, I never met myself, not once. And there's more diverse in the city today, but I never met somebody who was Afro-Caribbean heritage, who hadn't gone to a very posh school or wasn't a prince something from Nigeria or something. So, and then when I was in The Secret Millionaire, it was quite interesting. I was driving my little Milltown and my Porsche Cayenne when it went out, and my phone lit up. Whereas people say, I never knew you went to a school like that. I never knew you grew up in a place like that. That's because you never asked. So I never told you. So in D&I circles that I've learned, I advise Sky on this, is a thing called covering, where you spend a lot of your time pretending you're something or somebody you're not, so you don't get found out. And I did this a lot. Look at my accent, right? I say bath and laugh. I never used to, but I realized that I was never going to get a job as a lawyer in the City of London with a Lancashire accent. So I just purposely changed it.
Wow.
So I'm an example of thinking myself as talent. I had potential.
Yeah.
That typically would never, ever have made it to earning, £250,000 a year in his early mid-20s in the city. Yeah. Because there were so many barriers to get through and get over. I was just bloody minded and blinking. But everybody's like me, and everyone should be like me. And that, if you think about the amount of people that try or on that journey and just don't make it for whatever reason,
yeah,
or they do make it, and then for something they don't feel as though they belong there and they leave, that's just a waste. And it's a waste of talent.
Yeah.
If you're an organization, I always say to organizations, they always say, how do we become more diverse? I'm kind of like, you're always hiring yourself. You've got to go and fishing in unfamiliar waters and fish deeper. And what that means is time, energy, resource, process, new networks, which means money. And oh, right, okay. So, and what Sky did, one of the reasons why I do advise Sky is that they put £30 million behind the Diversity Advisory Council over it's now a 4-year cycle.
Yeah.
And that means they can actually affect real change. So D&I is important societally.
Yes.
Important in terms of fairness. But, at the end of the day, the cold, hard reality is that diverse businesses are better, they're stronger, they're happier, and they're more profitable.
Yeah. And diverse communities as well.
It all flows together, doesn't it? So if you're a leader, it's your job.
Yeah, 100%. And so you gave the example of Sky. I mean, are there other initiatives that you've been involved in, or that you'd want people who are listening to look into, and as an exemplar, kind of program?
I was a founding trustee of the, it's now called the Aleto Foundation, Aleto, and that basically looking for the leaders of tomorrow. We spent a lot of time trying to work out, what do we do? So a lot of what we ended up doing, or it's kind of changed a little bit now, but it's kind of summer schools. That's been backed by like BT and Deloitte and various large brands to help people from Afro-Caribbean backgrounds, second year undergraduates. They're doing quite well, kind of fast track. There weren't people that are struggling. There were people that are sort of on the way, but it's providing the extra lift, push, inspiration, access to networks, that social capital they may not have. Diversity. There's diversity, which is being asked to the party. There's inclusion, which is actually being asked to dance. And what tends to happen is in different economic periods is that diversity, inclusion, especially, that's making sure people feel as though they belong, and social mobility generally starts to go backwards. And that's something we're already seeing in the current climate. So I'm really passionate about it now, because I think that I've kind of lived it. I mean, when I was I got so many stories, as you can imagine. You've got thousands of microaggressions, then you've got some obvious racism, and there's a whole load in the middle which would make great stories. For example, I'd go to a meeting and I'd sit there. I'd be the boss, right? I'm paying everyone their flipping room. And I'd arrive early, and people would come in and they're filing the nails, checking social media, looking out the window, ringing their mum. And I'd say, we're going to start the meeting. And they'd all look around the table while waiting for Piers.
Oh, no.
And the point there is, no one expected Piers to look like or be me. And so many stories like that. So that needs to change,
Yeah. You'll never be happy or content, but do you feel that the world is moving in the right direction? Do you feel that there has been some progress made? And off the back of that, what would be the one thing that you would want to really change in this area if you could have a magic wand tomorrow?
So I think you can look around and think, there's been progress made here and there, but overall, no, I do not think enough progress has been made. I don't think that, the days when I was, 13, walking down the hill where I used to live, and a dad would cross the road with his son, walk up to me and say, get back to your own country, the N word. They're probably gone in most places. But, you look in the US, for example, George Floyd, and what happened after that, Black Lives Matter movement, and here. And I do a lot of things for corporate, keynotes, Black History Month, for example. And some have wheeled me in because some employee resource group wants a speaker, and he'll do. Some really mean it, and they've thrown resource at it. Sky's a great example. And some want to do something but don't really know how to, and are really struggling. So I kind of see the whole spectrum of what they're trying to do. But I just don't think, sadly, enough has changed. And that's why, calling people out, applying resource to it, which means money, and targets, and making a difference,
Yeah.
and actually meaning it is what's required. But again, I will always say, don't wait for your large company to do something, or your employer. Just do it yourself.
I have to say one thing that I've always really enjoyed. I'm a bit old now, but I played a lot of club sport when I was younger, and I found that was an amazing place to anyone can go and play cricket. Not anyone, because actually you need a cricket bat and a ball and so on. But I had created some amazing friendships and met such a diverse community through playing sport.
Yeah, sport can be a leveler, absolutely.
Yeah, and I do think, well, this was in clubs for the towns that I lived in, and we see thousands of projects on Action Funder, bringing communities together over a shared interest, whether it's sport, whether it's academic, whether it's training, whether it's so on. And I'm very proud of, we've got 7,000 non-profits on Action Funder. They've created about 4,500 projects they need funding for. And we've actually just building the technology at the moment to review the diversity of those projects and the inclusiveness of those projects, because we can see it happening. But what we want to do now is actually confirm that.
What you do, Action Funder, is important, because you might have the social capital, but what you've got are ideas. And I always say that ambition, right, is evenly distributed.
Yeah.
Probably unevenly distributed. I actually think that if you come from a more difficult socioeconomic or ethnic background, you're probably more likely to be potentially slightly more ambitious. You're definitely more entrepreneurial. There's lots of stats to show that. So that's evenly distributed. Access to capital and networks, opportunity, and the support isn't.
Yep.
You may have a great idea to do something for your community, but a lot of think, well, I can't afford to do it. I don't know how to raise money. I don't know how to bring people up. I've got no one I know who's got any money. So by engaging with Action Funder and being connected to source of capital, it opens doors that never existed.
And the money's from companies generally, so therefore you also get that touch point. So the next kind of area here we've got is the role of the third sector, and we kind of just touched on it there, about you obviously were on the board of Nesta, and thank you very much for the check you wrote us a number of years ago now, which actually got us going. And if anyone's listening, Nesta's a great organization, and they're getting that seed money to get your idea going is invaluable. Obviously, the role of the third sector, especially at the moment, is critical, where you're seeing, again, the funding cuts and everything else that goes with that. So what do you see as the principal role of the third sector? I mean, you're obviously involved with a number of charities. What are you saying to these charities? What direction they need to take?
Well, there's different levels, isn't there? So there's kind of macro, which is, you've got the private sector, you've got government, and there's a big gap in the middle. And the third sector often there's a vacuum, gets sucked into that vacuum. And you got your massive charity. We were saying before we started that a handful of charities receive most of the money that's raised in the UK, which is not ideal. But that's because they're machines and they're huge. They've been going probably 200 or 100 years at least. And like any business, they build scale. And then you've got your micro version, which is the local kids need somewhere to ride their BMXs or whatever it might be, right? Or to play their instruments or to do anything. So, and that's micro local knowledge that you're never really going to get in a very, very large charity trying to deal with a large issue. My view is that a lot of charities I've come across and work with is dangerous, because raising money for a charity can be just as hard work as raising a grant, as just as hard work as going to do your seed financing for your startup. So I'm a big believer in going back to business should be a force for good, is trying to, if possible, not always possible, to create models that have some kind of income revenue stream. So at least if you can't raise that grant money or those donations that week or that month, you don't disappear. Again, I think you've got a gap in the middle of the private sector and government. Government's probably is shrinking away from lots of these things. You've got the large organizations do part of that. And then you've got the organizations that are left. I think that if some of them can create models that make them more sustainable financially, then I think the third sector could be far more powerful than it currently is.
Well, there's an amazing stat that I think it was last year, £900 million was spent from the third sector just on applications alone. And and I'd echo that. I mean, people always said with us with Action Funder, "Oh, you're a business." It's like, yeah, because if we can generate revenue and earn money, then we can build that resilience in, and we can scale, and we can then start to drive more and more impact.
Yeah, and there's always that trade-off between the ESG-based funds, the ones that ethical funds, blah blah blah, where your pension holders, their stakeholders, they've got a legal obligation to maximize profits for them, where they can't take a hit because it's doing some good in the world somewhere for the financial return, and that's changing a little bit. But if you can blend those two things together, which goes back to my thesis back in the day, really,
this has got to get published.
You can do something that is profitable. You can pay people market wages and do something that does some good in the world.
Yeah, just talking about the third sector. So Anthropy, it brings together leaders from across sectors to bring together positive change from what I've seen. Do you want to just tell the audience a little bit about Anthropy and how why you got behind that and what it's trying to achieve and what you're proud of?
Anthropy is amazing thing that was created by a chap called John O'Brien, and he had this vision really of creating Anthropy, which is, I'll probably get told off for saying that, but it's kind of like the Davos for the UK. Really, it's really about how do you create a better country, one that it's about people, place, about prosperity. There's a global perspective as well, and the first event they did, he happened to know the chap that built the Eden Project.
Yeah.
So Tim
Smith.
Yeah. So they had the first one was there. You had people from all walks of life, politics. You got to leave your ego at the door, just sitting around in simulated rainforests, having conversations about the impact of the youth on the economy going forwards and things like that. And it's an amazing thing. So this year they're doing number 2. It's been sponsored now by some.
When's it happening?
Big sponsors. I think it's in November. Back in the Eden Project as well.
Okay.
Amazing initiative. And I think that's going to go on and grow to be something that's actually really important in the UK calendar for anybody, whether you're government, your private sector, or your third sector. It kind of brings everybody together. It's really powerful.
Okay, great. Well, we need to make sure that people are aware of that. So Anthropy Eden Project event happening in November.
So I've just checked. It's the 1st to 3rd of November at the Eden Project, and you can get tickets online. Anthropy.uk.
Brilliant, thank you. Which brings us to the last topic around tech for good. And so obviously you're a big AI advocate, and I need to go and do an AI kind of evening course, I think, because I agree with you. This is going.
It's all on YouTube. You don't need to do an evening course.
Really?
You can find the right video. I'll send you a few if you want.
That'd be awesome. Thanks, Piers.
But when I was at Nesta did a lot of research years ago now about the likely impact of artificial intelligence and robotics on the economy. So if you imagine, I'm kind of simplifying it now, you imagine you've got the northeast, right? Loughborough around there, and a lot of call centers.
Yeah.
So if suddenly you didn't need to have humans on the phone in call centers because a large language model is pretty good at doing that, if not better.
Yeah.
Suddenly you've got whole swathes of the country where the biggest employer disappears.
Yeah.
That's what happens. So if you want to retrain those people for what could happen, that was like 20 years out, you got to start now.
Yeah. Because
our education system is pretty slow. And the outcome of that research was that, don't worry, if you're creative, you're probably okay. And what's happened is large language models, these things that run, things like ChatGPT, people use, or Google Bard or Claude, they're very good at generating content. Now, whether it's words or whether it's an image, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And it enables us now to talk to technology, which we've never been able to do. These companies are going to change the world. So the way they operate, the way they think almost, their ethos is actually really important, because this is not going to be Apple, where everyone, the billions of people got a phone. This is going to be technology that literally runs your life. It could be the first person you talk to when you go to sleep, and the first person you talk to when you wake up. The danger is that education, law, regulation cannot keep up with this technology. It can't keep up with the linear world. It's going to struggle to keep up with an exponential world. So I think that in our lifetimes, even our lifetimes, we'll see huge change. And this is going to have a profound effect on society, on the need for human labor, both cognitive labor and physical labor. So going back to communities, and the way I look at it is this: there's a ship, a big shiny one, leaving the harbor, right? And most of society is going to be left on the quayside. And that's not admin workers, taxi drivers, people driving forklift trucks. That's the professions, knowledge work first, actually, creatives. So that ship's leaving the harbor. And I always say that right now, you as an individual can learn how to use this stuff and augment yourself, scale yourself up, become AI assisted, and you can jump onto that ship. If you're a business, you immerse yourself and embrace AI. But eventually the gap between the quayside and the ship becomes so big, you can't jump.
You can't jump.
And whoever's left on that quayside, in terms of individuals, companies, countries, regions, societies, they're staying there forever. That's it, it's done. And when that happens that day, which could be in my lifetime, different in my children's lifetimes, we're going to have to revisit and rethink how we actually structure society generally. So the point that we're going earlier about, we had those three things, private sector, public sector, third sector.
Yeah.
If you think about the private sector, it's going to shrink, right? The cost of most things is going to zero, especially content. So then what? So the government is going to have to expand almost, because how are people going to earn or feed themselves? And then you're going to have lots of issues throughout society, macro and micro, where the third sector is going to have to step in. But then who's got the money to fund them? So you think about it, it's a mess that is approaching us. So we need to get our ducks in a row, because the people that do, the societies do, the countries that do, are going to be the winners.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, obviously with Action Funder, we've created tech, and we're looking into AI, how that can really start to help with that matching algorithm, and how it might be able to help the non-profits create projects so that they can put their best foot forward. So when companies are reviewing projects, they're seeing a project that's been AI generated for the non-profits, for example, rather than them spending 35% of the time creating applications, which is what the industry norm is and we're trying to battle. They might spend 1% of their time creating applications because they've got an AI bot that can enable them to do that, but in a very trustworthy environment. So tech for good for us that's really what we've tried to zero in on with Action Funder. It's about enabling people to increase the social capital, as you were talking about earlier, and how it can increase their channels and opportunities. So our belief, and my belief, is that there's a solution to every social problem in this country. You just need to get the right money at the right time to the right people. And I think also there is the perfect timing where ESG is now starting to generate real business value. And so we're trying to bring the two together in a tech for good environment. But is there any kind of tech for good examples that you've seen that you'd want to pull out that you think the listeners should really think about and look at?
I think the most profound ones are the AI founders now, because if you look at Emad, I'm going to pronounce it correctly, Mastika, he's a co-founder of Stability AI. So they are basically, think about getting into the hands of every child in, say, Africa or wherever they are, in some less developed country, an iPad or similar device that has the equivalent of ChatGPT on it. So now, because these things don't need to be connected to the internet, so now every child in the world can now have access to the complete and utter everything that's on the internet, for example, or all human knowledge and all human know-how in terms of how to apply that knowledge. So that's what he's trying to do. So that is a game changer.
Totally. And if you look at it, it's not just all that human knowledge, but it's also the way that human knowledge can be digested or put to those populations in the right way. Yeah,
digesting it, analyzing it, making decisions, having some company, having someone that understands different languages. Those companies are the ones that are going to have the most impact.
And I can totally see that and agree.
And there's companies like yours in Action Funder. I mean, you're for profit, but it's great that you couldn't exist without technology. No. So, and the fact you're leveraging it to connect people and build communities and make establish relationships is what it's all about. And AI, how you use that will only, you said it, one of the major pains of raising money is applications, research. I mean, generative AI, this is what it's best at, literally. And there's an AI called Claude, which is like ChatGPT, but Claude will write you a proposal of 2,000-3,000 words. Absolutely a game changer. So what you do, it's like a person. You go and find the research, the context, you feed it all in, and then you learn how to help it to prompt it, basically, to write documents in the way you want them written. And then boom, what used to take probably a week, you can probably do in a couple of hours.
Amazing, the opportunity. Biz, so last thing, a takeaway. So if there's one thing that you want anyone watching this to go away and do, what would that be?
So it's the micro point that we can all make a difference. So don't wait for somebody around you, your employer, or to go and make a difference. And if you have access to capital, you can get involved with Black People Action Fund or charities, or you've got time, networks, whatever it might be. Do not underestimate the value and the power of that, because most people watching this or listening to this will have this social capital, which is invaluable. So just by picking up the phone, working with somebody, mentoring somebody, going to an event, putting a hand up saying, I can connect you with this person, just take it upon yourself, if you're listening to this, watching this, to make a difference, even if it's just one, to somebody's life by opening your Rolodex or spending 20 minutes having a coffee with them, because that can have a profound effect on someone's entire life.
Amazing. Piers, thank you so much for being part of the podcast here, Breaking the Mold. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Breaking the Mold. We're back in a few weeks to talk about positive impact in communities with Sarah Mitten from Clarion Futures, the charitable arm of housing association Clarion Housing. To be alerted when our episode comes out, simply subscribe on your podcast player of choice. For more content on how leaders from the private and charity sectors are creating change today, go to the Action Funder website at www.actionfunder.org. You'll be able to search from grassroots nonprofits near you and learn more about how to make an impact for people, planet and profit.